I froze as I saw the papers lying on the mahogany desk. My signature forged. My penthouse, the one place I called mine, was gone. My sister's name glared at me from the top of the contract. I felt my chest tighten like someone had grabbed my heart and squeezed. My name is Emily Carson. And from wherever you're watching this, stay with me. Have you ever been treated like a stranger in your own family? Like the person you trusted most could become your enemy overnight? I remember the way Claire smiled when she handed me the champagne glass. That smile had teeth in it. "Don't worry, Em," she said, voice soft as silk. "We just want what's best for you." Best for her, I realized. Not me. Not ever me. The betrayal wasn't a sudden act. It was a quiet, cruel evolution. Every phone call I ignored, every dinner I skipped, every success I celebrated alone, they all led here. They thought I wouldn't notice. That I would quietly vanish, accept the theft as some cosmic joke. But they didn't know me. Not really. I grabbed the papers, trembling. My signature stared back, mockingly precise, as if I had willingly handed them over. My hands shook so hard I dropped the glass. Champagne spilled across the marble, glinting like broken promises. The betrayal isn't just about money. It's about trust, about the foundation you thought your life was built on. My sister, my father, they were architects of my ruin, designing a house I would never live in again. I left the penthouse that night, my heels echoing through the empty lobby. The elevator doors closed behind me like a coffin. Outside, the city lights blurred into streaks of judgment. People passed, oblivious, lives burning quietly, and yet I carried a fire that could consume everything. They didn't see the storm coming. I could feel it in my blood, the slow, deliberate burn of rage, sharpened by every smile Claire had given me over the years. Every time she said, "We're family, Em," I had bitten my tongue, pretending that her words weren't a blade sliding along my ribs. I knew what I had to do. I wasn't going to scream, beg, or plead. Those were tools for people who wanted mercy. I wanted justice. I wanted exposure. And I wanted them to feel the same helplessness that now clenched my chest like a fist. Walking into the night, I made a silent vow. I would turn their own game against them. Every secret, every lie, every betrayal, they would pay. And I would be the stranger who returned, burning and unstoppable. Because family is sacred until it isn't. Until it becomes a weapon. And tonight, theirs had just exploded in my face. Some people wait for storms to pass. I wait for storms to break, and then I strike. They thought I'd fold into silence. They thought a signature on a forged paper could erase the woman who built her own life from scratch. They didn't know that when everything is taken, you learn how to see the hidden seams. My name is Emily Carson. And from wherever you're watching this, stay with me. Have you ever watched the people who hurt you smile and felt nothing but the cold click of calculations behind their eyes? Have you ever counted the exact moment your life became someone else's story? Claire threw a celebration party the week after the transfer. Faux pearls at her throat, a laugh too bright, guests clinking glasses to the new Emily. They toasted to my generosity. They cheered for a theft they called kindness. I walked in like a ghost with a grin, nodded at the same faces who'd pretended to love me. I let them believe they'd won. But beneath my smile I was mapping everything. Names. Dates. The notches on the calendar where calls had gone unanswered. The concierge who always opened the door at 6:03 p.m., the lawyer who'd lost a file last March. People leave patterns if you know how to look. Patterns are proof. I started small, harmless seeds. A text to Claire at midnight. "I know about the contract." No accusation, no threat. Just a fact. She replied with a string of emoji and a patronizing "we can talk." The lawyer texted back twice from an unknown number. The concierge overshared at a fundraiser, spilling that he'd seen a man delivering a truck full of boxes to the Penthouse 2 nights before the signing. His eyes darted when I asked him to repeat it like a rat caught mid-scurry. I took cash from my savings, $5,000 in 20s, because paper money and anonymous hands still open doors. I hired a private investigator with a face like a tired saint and a notebook full of grief. I learned to make calls that sounded like coincidence and drop names with the exact right weight. I watched Claire from the shadow of a cafe window across the street. Lipstick bright, laughter measured, the same hand that had once smoothed my hair now brushing crumbs off her own lap as if nothing had happened. Every breadcrumb I left and every crumb I followed stitched together a picture I could use. A pattern emerged. Claire's boyfriend, Tom, wasn't merely a lover. He was a broker of favors, a man who could get signatures and move papers without asking questions. The lawyer who handled the transfer had a safe deposit box 2 blocks from Claire's apartment. The notary had a mistress who loved the finer things. Cash, a condo, a promise. They had built a scaffolding of small corruptions and called it family business. I would take each beam down by the joints. My actions were surgical. I leaked a rumor to a rival cousin. Nothing violent, just a whisper about Claire's sudden windfall. Greed like rot spreads fast. Invitations to charity galas dried up. Sponsorships withdrew their glossy checks. Friends who'd sipped champagne at her party started painting their smiles thinner. I planted proof of Claire's forged signature in a place I knew the concierge would find it, then feigned shock when he waved it at me like a confession. Beneath every calculated move, there was a childish, vicious delight. I reveled in watching their confidence waver. They thinned. They blinked. The sister who once sharpened knives by smiling now chewed them. And then the first real mistake. Claire left her phone unlocked on her kitchen counter while answering the door. I could have called her out then, smashed the whole web in one go, but I held back. There are moments when exposing everything is too easy, cheap. I wanted the reveal to sting. I wanted the mirror to be held up and show them not just what they'd done, but what they had always been. I slid my hand across the screen, read every message that confirmed the conspiracy and felt for the first time in months something like peace. Not the peace of forgiveness. Never that. But the peace of a plan finally taking shape. Outside the city slept. Inside my pulse was a metronome set to a single refrain. Set the stage. Make them stumble. Let the stranger watch them fall. When you lose your home they say you lose comfort. What they don't tell you is that losing everything also teaches you how to build a trap. Tonight mine was almost ready. And the most dangerous thing? They still thought I was broken. I walked into the gala like a ghost who'd learned how to wear skin again. Crystal chandeliers fell across my shoulders. Waiters moved in choreography. Donors smiled like they were buying absolution. Claire stood in the center, a queen on rented grace, greeting a crown of applause I had paid for in patience and patience's costs. My name is Emily Carson. And from wherever you're watching this, stay with me. Have you ever handed the perfect weapon to someone else and watched them aim it truer than you ever could? I'd rehearsed calm until it felt like armor. The concierge's lost ledger was tucked into my clutch. The lawyer's safe deposit receipt was folded inside my heel. But those were the scaffolding, not the thunder. For thunder, I needed a voice that couldn't be stopped. A stranger with reach, with no family ties to retract a truth at the first tremor. Her name was Jordan Hale. She didn't dress like the other women. No silk, no rehearsed laugh. Just a leather jacket and a camera rig slung like a badge. She was famous in small, jagged corners of the internet. An investigative live streamer who turned corruption into content and content into court notices. I found her at a charity afterparty, 2 cigarettes and a cup of bad coffee between us, and I gave her the file. I don't want money, I said. I want them to see themselves the way I do. Jordan studied me like she was weighing a ledger. You're taking a big risk, she said. This could ruin a lot of lives. Maybe people who aren't directly involved. It's already ruined, I answered. They ruined mine. She nodded, not pitying, only measuring. I don't do vendettas, she murmured. I do proof. Proof, I learned then, is a ceremony. Jordan didn't need dramatic speeches. She needed something airtight. Recorded confessions, contracts with teeth. A chain of messages that couldn't be gaslit away. The private investigator handed over a thumb drive. Claire's own texts cooked on its surface like a confession. Tom had slipped, in a moment of arrogance, a voicemail to a friend, admitting the forgeries. The notary's mistress sent a photo of cash-stuffed envelopes with a smug, flippant caption. Patterns, yes, but now they were threads that could be traced. Jordan listened to everything once, twice, as if letting the sound settle into her bones. Then she smiled. A small, dangerous thing. We'll do it live. Live was a scalpel. It cut in front of the audience and left no time for excuses. The gala had a stage, a projector, cameras. And somewhere between dessert and the closing waltz, it would have a reckoning. I could have exposed them myself, stormed the stage and screamed. Instead I chose the stranger because strangers don't have the same mercy that family does. Strangers aren't weighed down by loyalty or by memory. Strangers can be merciless in ways the hurt already is. Backstage, I sat with my hands in my lap and watched Claire on stage, glowing in the light that I'd been paid to buy. Claire's laugh broke like glass and the room drank it in. I thought about the years we'd shared, the small cruelties, the deliberate forgettings. I thought about my father's quiet nod the night the papers were signed. I thought about the way he refused to meet my eyes when the deed was done. Jordan gave me one last look. There was no pity there, only the grim satisfaction of someone who loved the exact moment truth collided with performance. He flicked a switch on her rig. The feed went live to thousands, strangers yes, but not many would call it mercy later. And then the projector flared to life, spilling proof across the white curtain behind Claire. Messages, receipts, the concierge's ledger, Tom's voicemail transcribed in black letters. Impossible to ignore. Claire's face changed from triumph to something thinner, like a bird realizing the sky was about to close in. In the crowd, forks paused midair. The music ground to a hush. My father's hand tightened into a fist I could see trembling from across the room. For a second, everything fell into a terrible, fragile clarity. Then a voice gasped, not from pity but from recognition. She told me Emily was the generous one. She told me it was all for charity. The sound of betrayal multiplied and came back to us amplified. And in that pause between the image and the reaction, I felt something else. A private joy sharp and foreign. It wasn't happiness. It wasn't even victory. It was the sight of consequence taking its first breath. They had built their lives on the complacency of people who believed in fairy tales about family. Tonight that fairy tale burned. Jordan leaned in and whispered in my ear, "They'll claw 'em, but they won't know who to hit first." I smiled without warmth because there are smiles that are weapons too. Outside, rain started, soft and indifferent, and for a moment the world smelled like truth washed clean. The curtain fell. The lights cut. But the sound of everything cracking didn't stop. And I realized something terrible and beautiful. I was no longer only the injured party. I was the scriptwriter of their unmasking. They scrambled like animals under light. Claire's smile split and sank. My father's jaw worked like machinery with rust. Sponsors disavowed, donations froze mid-transfer, and whispers sewed themselves into headlines. But the real damage was quieter. Friendships that were ledger-thin snapped, polite calls stopped, and the social scaffolding they'd climbed on began to creak. My name is Emily Carson. And from wherever you're watching this, stay with me. Have you ever watched someone tighten their lips so hard the truth leaks through the cracks? The night after the gala, my phone filled with messages I had no interest in answering. Threats, pleas, and one absurd, begging voicemail from Tom, words jumbled like a child stammering for a story he'd already lost. Claire texted me 2 words. "I'm sorry." I didn't reply. Words meant nothing now, only movement mattered. They thought the livestream was the bomb. They didn't know I kept a slow fuse lit under their world. The press would chew them up for a week, maybe 2. But reputations regenerate. Regret can be bought back with apologies on glossy paper. I wanted something more permanent, an unraveling that didn't need tabloid oxygen to survive. I began by turning their allies into auditors. The charity boards that had fawned took one look at the receipts Jordan had displayed and closed ranks with an efficiency I admired. The bank froze accounts. The lawyer's license took a hit when the Bar Association found the same fingerprints on other forged documents. Small administrative bodies, people who performed the tedious work of legality, became the slow, methodical engine of retribution. It wasn't flashy. It was surgical. It was relentless. Claire tried to bargain. She offered public apologies staged like prayers. She offered to return money she hadn't spent. She offered the penthouse, $10 million, and I imagined how easily she'd hand over cash that wasn't hers, as if money could reverse the muscle memory of betrayal. I declined every offer because each one felt like paying to erase a scar. I wanted the scar to stay visible and instructive. At night I walked the city with Jordan once or twice more, not as allies but as witnesses. She recorded our conversations for posterity, Snippets to remind the world that truth isn't a one-hit viral moment but a process. There were nights when I wanted to tell everything. The quiet manipulations, the dinners of measured compliments, the time my father signed away his daughter like a business asset. But some confessions aren't for the public. They're for the person you were before the fight, the self you want to rescue. Instead, I let them find their own ashes. Claire's friends abandoned weekend brunches. Her social calendar grew thin. The lawyer took an indefinite leave. Tom moved out of state, the coward's exile, because distance can buy the illusion of invisibility. My father's friends murmured at dinner parties, and I wondered if he could hear them when he slept. There were moments when vengeance felt small and petty. I planted an anonymous review about Claire's questionable ethics at a major philanthropy forum. I made sure the concierge's ledger found its way to an investigative reporter. I bought ad space, only $5,000, to run a photograph of the contract in a paper that mattered to people who counted reputations. These actions were tiny knives. They bled indignity slowly. But the sweetest cut came when Claire visited the Penthouse for the first time after the scandal, escorted by lawyers and a publicist with a smile that looked like a bandage. She looked at the skyline as if trying to remember how it had felt from my window. She pressed her hand to the glass and for a second, the person she'd been flickered across her face like a ghost. I realized then that punishment and mercy are sisters, and I had chosen neither. I had chosen exposure, the raw light that leaves nothing romantic in its wake. She left hours later, eyes rimmed, the penthouse colder for her presence. In the empty room, I walked to the balcony and opened the sliding door. The city hummed like the last note of a song. I let the wind in to carry out the faint scent of spilled champagne and decisions made under pressure. The night held its breath and I understood. Revenge is not a fireworks show. It is the slow returning of truth until the people who broke you understand they are smaller than they thought. And in that quiet, my chest unclenched just enough to know the next move. The next morning the city seemed unchanged. But I knew better. Claire's world had been fractured like glass. Every interaction, every call, every smile she gave now had the tremor of exposure beneath it. And yet there was one thing they hadn't accounted for. My patience was infinite and my strategy was ruthless. My name is Emily Carson. And from wherever you're watching this, stay with me. Have you ever seen the look in someone's eyes when they realize the person they've underestimated isn't broken, but sharpening? Claire had begun circling like a predator uncertain of the terrain. She tried to reclaim allies, former friends, neighbors, even my father, but the network had shifted. People I hadn't even known I could call were quietly watching, documenting, waiting. Reputation isn't just about public perception. It's about the subtle gravity of alliances, and theirs had collapsed. I knew I needed to escalate, to move from small knives to a scalpel. My first step was infiltration. I attended events where Claire expected to dominate. Fundraisers, galas, networking dinners. But instead of confronting her, I observed. I noticed patterns, weaknesses, and moments she believed were private. One evening at a high-profile art auction, Claire strutted through a crowd that had once fawned at her. She laughed too loud, her jewelry gleaming like desperate signals. I let her circle past, listening, noting, storing. And then I made my move, not openly, not yet, but subtly. A misplaced conversation, a whispered rumor to the right ears. And suddenly she was isolated in a room full of people who used to pretend to admire her. The private investigator I'd hired delivered a dossier thick with everything she'd thought was hidden. Bank statements, emails, personal messages. But I wasn't ready to unleash it wholesale. Timing is everything in a narrative like this, and I was writing a story that demanded tension. Late one night I called Jordan. Her eyes lit with that same dangerous excitement. "It's time to widen the net," I said. "The audience is ready for a sequel they didn't see coming." The plan was simple yet elegant. First, we would make Claire's financial indiscretions public, but not in isolation. Each exposure would build on the last, creating a chain of undeniable evidence. Then the social fallout. Friends would abandon her, partners would question their loyalties, and the media would pounce. The crescendo would be inescapable. But the most delicious part? Emotional warfare. I would not touch the penthouse or the money directly. I would make her feel the void, the emptiness of power without respect, the terror of watching a life you thought controlled unravel like fine silk in a storm. I started small. Invitations were rescinded. Sponsors called with polite apologies. Old friends sent brief notes citing conflicts or scheduling issues. Every withdrawal felt like a heartbeat, a pulse reminding her that I was still there, orchestrating, invisible yet omnipresent. Claire's frustration grew, her once calm demeanor cracked in private. I watched through surveillance reports how she paced, how she muttered under her breath, how she turned on those closest to her. Fear is a subtle, merciless teacher, and she was learning lessons she could never unlearn. That night, as I stood on my balcony in the penthouse she had stolen, the skyline stretched before me like a promise. The city didn't care about justice, it cared about spectacle. And I intended to deliver both. I lit a cigarette, inhaled deeply, and let the smoke curl into the darkness. Some people wait for storms to pass. I wait for storms to break, and then I strike. And tonight, the first crack in Claire's armor was only the beginning. They thought the worst had already happened. They were wrong. My name is Emily Carson. And from wherever you're watching this, stay with me. Have you ever watched a person trade their dignity for a story they tell themselves about being untouchable? Claire's web was unraveling faster now, boards, banks, and bar committees moving like trained wolves. But the strangest enemy was denial. She doubled down, hired a crisis PR firm with glossy brochures and promises that smelled like bleach. They tried to spin it into a misunderstanding, a paperwork error. My father called me once that week, voice thin and small. The man who'd signed away his daughter turned into someone who begged for a talking point. I let him talk until he ran out of breath. Then I said nothing. Silence can be a louder indictment than any shout. The legal suits began stacking like dark cards. The lawyer whose fingerprints were on the forged documents tried to file a countersuit. Mostly noise, but the bar placed a temporary hold on his license. Tom panicked, sent frantic messages about fixing this, and I discovered he had wired $50,000 to an offshore account before disappearing. Greed, it turns out, makes for a poor plan when the house is burning. I wanted them to feel collapse in every muscle. So I escalated in a way that left no easy recovery. I subpoenaed what the press couldn't get to. The private investigator, my saint with the tired face, had found a ledger in a storage unit beneath Claire's old address. It was worse than we'd hoped. Payoffs disguised as legitimate expenses, charity invoices with altered numbers, a coded list that named people who'd been bribed into silence. That ledger was a map of complicity. But legal paper can be delayed. I needed spectacle too, the kind that turns gossip into evidence in the eyes of ordinary people. Jordan suggested something reckless. A live deposition. Not the sanitized legal essay kind, but a televised, streamed confession from someone inside their circle who couldn't lie through a camera. We found our person in the least likely place. A former assistant named Marisol who'd been fired for asking too many questions. Marisol had a soft voice and a ledger of her own, calendar entries, receipts, and a conscience that finally refused to be bought. We set the stage at a small public theater. Jordan brought the cameras, I brought the proof, and Marisol brought the moment when a life finally chose honesty over fear. She spoke slowly, names falling like coins. Dates, amounts, meetings in parking garages, envelopes under tablecloths. Her hands shook at first, then steadied like someone who had been carrying a stone for years and finally set it down. The theater filled with an audience of strangers and the cameras spilled their words into living rooms and phones. The comments were a white noise of shock and anger. Claire watched from a corner with a publicist at her side, face a porcelain mask. My father sat 2 rows behind her, his tie limp, the color gone from his face like a photograph left in the sun. After Marisol finished, the room held its breath. Then a man in the 3rd row stood up, an ex-donor whose college scholarship fund had been quietly drained to cover Claire's expenses. He read an excerpt from the ledger and his voice broke like someone pulling a rag from a wound. The sound echoed. The theater felt suddenly like a courtroom and a confessional in the place where 2 people could finally be seen for what they were. There was fury, but there was also a terrible, clean clarity. People who had been complicit had names now, and names are heavy things to carry. Claire's publicist leaked a statement that read like an obituary for reputation. Contrition without ownership. Her attempts at contrition felt rehearsed and hollow. That night my father stopped answering his phone. I found him the next day, on the sofa, eyes hollowed, staring at the TV, repeating clips of someone he had helped ruin. There was no dramatic yelling, no cinematic collapse. Just a slow, absolute deflation like helium leaving a balloon. He looked at me with something I couldn't name. remorse, fear, the look of a man who realized he had invested in the wrong daughter. I had expected vindication to be a holy thing. Instead it felt messy and brutal and necessary. I had given people truth and the truth had teeth. As the cameras dimmed and the world turned the pages of its outrage, I walked back to the penthouse and stood at the window. The city lights were cold and indifferent, but from this height, consequences looked small and inevitable, like falling things you can't stop. Tonight I learned that revelation is not always loud. Sometimes it is the quiet undoing of a life, paper by paper, witness by witness, until the person who betrayed you is reduced to the size of the lies they told. And in that quiet, I felt something dangerous and unforgiving bloom, an idea that justice could be both public and painfully private, and that neither mercy nor cruelty would be allowed to pretend it had the final word.